No, I know, he sent me an email, a very nice email. It's got family issues. Yes. Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should make a start. It's gone 2 o'clock. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. The meeting is being broadcast live to the public, as is usual. For those not able to watch the footage, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Can I remind members and officers to please switch their microphones on when speaking and then turn it off when you've finished. Item 1, minutes of the meeting held on February the 7th. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on February the 7th are taken as read, confirmed and signed.
Agreed.
All happy with that?
Yep.
Thank you. Item 2, question time. I've not received any questions. Item 3, questions under Standing Order 7.3 from members. I've not received any questions either under that one. Item 4, there are no urgent items today. Right, item 5, declarations of interest. Now, I am a member of Harborough District Council, which is responsible for approving the local plan, including the Lutterworth East Strategic Development Area. I have served on the panel at the District Council, which is looking at the local plan. For that reason, I have sought advice from the monitoring officer, and on that basis I am declaring a personal interest in the report on the Lutter East development area. That is all I'm declaring. I'm advised that it's perfectly okay for me to carry on acting as the chair. Do members have any other declarations of interest? Let me finish.
No, I just wanted to say ditto, because everything Councillor Galton says applies to me as well.
Are there any other interests? No. Okay. Item 7, petitions. No, I haven't got any petitions. That takes us... Oh, I'm sorry, I've missed declarations of the party whip. There never are any, but I have to ask. Right. That takes us to the first substantive item then. Delivery review of the updated 3-year Youth Justice Plan. We're considering a report as we are the Statutory Scrutiny Committee for Crime and Disorder. Jane Moore, Assistant Director for Children and Early Help Services, will present this report. We've got Chris Bolas, Service Manager for the Youth Offending Team and Safer Communities. He's also here. Jane, would you like to start to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide the Commission with an update on the delivery of the Youth Justice Plan. And just by way of reminder, it's a statutory requirement for us to have a Youth Justice Plan in place. And the current plan was agreed or approved at Council in December 2017. Just again, by way of background, the Youth Justice Board has provided us with a framework for some years to follow and require us to present that plan to the Youth Justice Board regularly as well. So just an overview around some of the performance information. The Youth Justice Board monitors on 3 key performance indicators, one of which is the number of young people who enter the criminal justice system for the first time. Another is reoffending, and the final one is around education, training, employment at the end of supervision. The latest figures are detailed in paragraphs 6 to 11, but just by way of highlight, we are continuing to be successful at reducing the number of young people who enter the criminal justice system. And you can see that there was a 13% decrease compared to the previous year on the most recent Ministry of Justice data. As a result of the decrease in the number of young people coming into the criminal justice system, we have seen a change in the caseload held by the Youth Offending Service. So we now know that whilst the number of young people have reduced, those that are coming into the criminal justice system are far more complex, and the caseloads of yacht workers are becoming more complex than it have ever been before. We do monitor the reoffending by young people, and again we are doing well in terms of our our national and regional benchmarking. So the frequency of reoffending by offenders is 0.92, and we measure that by the frequency at which young people reoffend. And you can see that that's well ahead of regional data and national performance as well. And again, that's in the context of an increasingly complex cohort of young people that we're working with as well. As usual for Leicestershire, our custody performance has been significantly improving over the last 7 years. So in the last year that we were monitoring, only 2 young people received a custodial sentence, which is less than previous. There has been a recent spike in the young people receiving a custodial sentence, although that has only up to about 6, so we're still well ahead of national performance. And this year has been exceptional. There's been 2 young people who have been sentenced to a custodial sentence with no previous convictions for very serious offences. And finally, our education, training and employment performance. This has been an area that the YOS has paid particular attention to, but has seen an improvement over the last year. So our target is that 80% of young people at the end of their order are in education, training and employment. And you can see that our most recent data shows that we are meeting or slightly exceeding that target. So part of the purpose of coming here today was to provide you with a progress on the areas that we'd identified in the plan that required focus and development. So the plan does highlight a number of areas that we wanted to focus on. One was around resettlement, one was around child exploitation, user voice, disproportionality, desistance and education, training and employment. And we've detailed in the following paragraphs how we are working on those areas. And I'll pull out some particular bits. The first one is around those young people receiving custodial sentence, and certainly identifying them as the most challenging young people to work with, and wanting to ensure that their resettlement packages are good for when they leave custody. So we're working to ensure that the two most critical resettlement areas are given the required focus, one of which is education and the other one is accommodation. And we have 2 new pieces of work that are focusing on improving for this group of young people. Paragraph 15 highlights the work that we're doing around continued focus on identification of those young people who are experiencing and at risk of child sexual exploitation. We did undertake an audit across the YOS that identified all young people who were experiencing CSE and had a look at the work that we needed to do in supporting those young people as well. We do know that we support a disproportionate number of looked after children, and we are working closely with the child and care teams to not only identify those young people, but identify those young people most at risk of offending, and carrying out work alongside our colleagues within children's social care to target effective interventions to support those young people as well. If I can take you to paragraph 18, as I mentioned earlier, we have been paying particular attention to those young people who are not in education, training and employment, who are also open to the Youth Offending Service. And it's an area where we know that those young people who are working with the Youth Offending Service don't do as well or are not as engaged in education as those who are not. So it is an area that we have paid particular attention to. And our performance over the years has demonstrated the impact of that in terms of increased number of young people at the end of their order being in education, training and employment. So we do have a EAT strategy, education, training and employment strategy group that pulls together a range of agencies to look at individual cases and the support that those young people require to get them back into education. And then just finally, a little bit on resources. Over the last 3 years, the Youth Offending Service has had a reduction in its funding for a number of reasons. Some of that's a reduction in the Youth Justice Grant that comes to us, and some of it is a reduction in partnership funding. However, the service has benefited from transition funding that it was given back in 2012-13 that's enabled us to manage the budget despite those changes as well. And the Youth Offending Service will be part of the Early Help Service Review, of which we're consulting at the moment. Thank you.
Right, so the service continues, but there are some difficult decisions going ahead, aren't there, in relation to the review that's going on and so on and so forth. The partnership funding Is that a matter for individual organisations, or are they required to commit? So, for example, the pool budgeting on page 21, the Police and Crime Commissioner, the National Probation Service, Health, are they required, or is that by negotiation?
No, there's a requirement under the Crime and Disorder Act for a contribution to be made. It doesn't define whether that contribution should be in monetary terms or whether it should be a resource base, and it doesn't define the level of contribution. So it requires those organisations to be a partner of the Youth Offending Service and to provide resource. What it doesn't do is define the level of the resource.
Okay, so there is negotiation in there, and is that on an annual basis that you sort of have to have those discussions? They don't say commit for 3 years or so. I'm just thinking about the context of our review that we're doing. You know, the danger is that other organisations might say, well, if you're looking to review this and take funding out, then maybe we'll have to do the same, and then it becomes a spiralling effect.
It is done on an annual basis. So we do the work with partners around agreeing funding through the Youth Offending Service Management Board, at which all of those partners are represented. So we do go out on an annual basis to have the conversations with partners around what that level of funding will be. Some of the funding is agreed nationally. So, for example, the National Probation Service has a national agreement around the kind of level of funding, and some of it is agreed locally. So there may be a risk around continued contributions. However, a big proportion of the work of the Youth Offending Service is a statutory obligation for us to fulfil, and obviously those partners still have a statutory requirement to make that contribution.
Okay, that's helpful. Right, David.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report, Jane. Can I refer you to paragraph 9? And custodial performance has increased significantly, and I think that's to be celebrated. Good news. And it seems to be quite a huge reduction. Is there any evidence of courts treating offenders more lightly, or is there any evidence of increase in non-custodial sentence? And if so, how does our performance fit in with that?
Thank you. In terms of custodial performance, one of the things that we know is that in order to provide an alternative decision or an alternative option for those who are sentencing, we need to go to court with a really robust package. So one of the things we do know is two things. One is that the courts have a lot of confidence in our court officers in court, and we also have very strong bail support packages or community support packages as well. So often when our officers are going to court, they will write a report with a recommendation for what the outcome should be, and magistrates have a lot of confidence in our officers to deliver that. So it's not that magistrates are being more lenient. What we're able to do is offer a very robust alternative to custody that magistrates are taking us up on. What we also do monitor, and again we've put the performance within the report, is the reoffending of young people on community sentences, and we are able to compare that to the reoffending of young people on custodial sentences. So there is a good menu of opportunities or different packages for children and young people in the community, and those are all supported by members of the Youth Offending Service to varying degrees. So some of the skill in the reduction of custodial sentences in Leicestershire is our breadth of packages that we can offer as alternatives for young people.
Could I just add one point to that? The impact of reducing first-time entrants has slowed young people through the criminal justice system. So, in effect, the number of decisions that magistrates might have to make around custody has reduced as a result, because they tend to be a bit older. And as you'll see in the report, I talk about 18-year-olds more being transitioned, around 17 when they're going to custody, when we were probably seeing them 15, 16 in the past. So we've slowed the process through. So it's a combination effect that has seen that reduction, but it's very closely linked to first-time entrants.
Yes. As David just said, that it's a real good news story. Performance is improving despite challenging times. But you said caseloads are getting more complex. Now, with caseloads getting more complex and us having that there being resource implication in the long run, where do you see the biggest risks and the challenges to keep up this continual improvement, and how can you see it being mitigated so you carry on to sustain this constant improvement?
I'll start, and I'm sure Chris will add. I think there are two things. One of the reasons why the Youth Offending Service is successful is partly around the way in which they performance manage and manage their caseloads. And I think there's very little risk with that going. So the Youth Offending Service has a good management oversight system, they have a good audit process, and they manage young people within the system very well. And that won't go. There's no risk of that going. I think the other bit is that with the increased complexity of children that we're supporting, there's a greater requirement for a more multi-agency input as well. So Chris's team work very closely with colleagues in social care, in health and in other organisations to ensure that we're working holistically with those young people. So I think some of the opportunities in the future are building that even further and identifying the best possible to support for these young people who are really complex, and making sure that we're working very closely together to continue to support them.
Right, I've got. Sorry,
just add a little bit. We've been fortunate that that as budgets have been cut over the recent years, that we've seen a reducing caseload as well, linked to first-time entrants. So that's part of what has helped us to pull the trick off of continuing to maintain high levels of performance despite reduced funding. But one of the things that we have focused on is prevention, and the changes to early help will mean that there will be challenge to that prevention and our effectiveness in doing that. So we've got a really challenging bit to do, is to ensure that we provide a good quality preventative component as we do the early help reductions in funding, which we're working on at the moment. I'm reasonably confident that we can pull that off, but it is going to be very challenging, and we'll have to wait and see whether we're successful or not.
Thank you. Right, I've got two Terrys next, so I'll take Terry Inan first.
Thank you, Chair. As members here will know, we've just come out of a workshop on poverty, and it kind of made me think that there is no direct causal relationship between poverty and crime, but certainly a criminal record doesn't do your economic ability any good. So I was very interested in what you were saying about people not in education, employment and training. And it's quite a jump from 64.5%, which is well below your target of 80%, last year, to 80.4% in the less than this year that we've got the data for. And this is when I kind of want to get a little bit cynical, because I'm thinking, what kind of employment, education and training? Because it could be quite easy looking at that figure to go, oops, and get them all into these kind of non-trainings where you just take people and teach them how to rewrite their CV 100 times. How do I know that this is actually sustainable employment, education and training where people won't just come out the other end not much better off than before?
The cynicism is useful. For us, what we have done is performance did slip away when the changes around academies and things like that happened. So it took us a while to adjust to the new environment and to develop ways with the new arrangements to make sure that we did get young people into employment and training. We deal with hard-to-reach young people who are quite hard-bitten when it comes to accessing resources. So if we do put them into things that are not meaningful, it doesn't stick. So I'm reasonably confident that we are putting them into meaningful things, and that's the only way we'll get it to stick. So the training that they're offered is, I think, of a reasonable quality.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered what the 18-19 budget is looking like?
The 18-19 budget for the Youth Offending Service is looking very similar to this year's budget. However, we are awaiting the allocation from the Youth Justice Board, and we often hear that very late, so we don't get notification of that. In fact, we received a letter from the Youth Justice Board just a couple of weeks ago to let us know that they would be letting us know what our grant is. So at the moment, we are budgeting on a very similar budget to this year. We know what our partner contributions are, but obviously that does depend on whether the Youth Justice Board make any significant changes to our budget. One of the things the Youth Offending Service is very good at doing is managing within its budget and managing vacancies well, and managing within a kind of quite last-minute changing budget. So the Youth Offending Service is very good at managing a budget within that environment.
Can I just ask one follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
I assume that was like the starter in the
No, it's only a very short question. It's only one. I mean, we can't. If they haven't told us, we can't do anything about it, can we? It was just interesting if it's similar. Where are we with the Police and Crime Commissioner? Are they actually putting more? I would have thought with such a huge increase in their council tax, they might put some towards this.
No, the Police and Crime Commissioner has given us the allocation. I think when they gave us the allocation, they gave us notification that allocation would remain the same for a while. So that allocation includes the financial contribution they make, but also officer support within the Youth Offending Service as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just ask your 3-year strategic plan, is it due to change much if the early help service review goes ahead, and obviously with the integration into the early help 0 to 19 family wellbeing service? Will it change? Will you have to reproduce that and amend?
No, I don't think the plan will change, because what the plan sets out is the work that the Youth Offending Service wants to focus on. I think the opportunity within the early help review is aligning some of the other early help services to support the delivery of some of the work the Youth Offending Service does. Again, one of the things the Youth Offending Service is very strong on is looking at areas that require focus in order to reduce offending and reoffending. So I think there's some really good learning for other services. So there will not be any impact to the 3-year plan from the review.
Just on the looked after children increase, so obviously we know that looked after children are increasing because we keep having to put more money into that. But the other element that I've come across lately is private children homes, which actually don't have any Leicestershire children in at all. They're being referred from local authorities 100 miles away, in the case in my division. Now, what gets picked up by the Leicestershire team? Is it where the crime is? Is it where they live? How does it get allocated as to whether it goes to us or the city or whatever?
There's a very specific protocol which is agreed nationally with the YJB. If a looked after child arrives in our area and goes to a private children's home, the local youth offending, and they've been involved in offending or offend whilst they're here, the local Youth Offending Service is responsible for that child, and they ask us to oversee that supervision, and we liaise closely with them to make sure that we're getting the support we need from their local social services. Because we've got two systems operating in tandem. We've got the LAC system, which requires the local authority, wherever they're placed, to be responsible, and the youth justice system, which has to deal with them where they are. So we've got, we have to, hence the arrangements being that the local YOS remains responsible. They do the liaison with their own social services, and we liaise with them to make sure that the services service and joint working is tightly involved. We also work very closely with the children's homes as well to make sure that we can manage the situation.
And if a crime is committed in Leicestershire while they're here, then that we have to deal with that.
We deal with it. We'll deal with what needs to be dealt with, but in liaison with the Home Youth Offending Service.
That's helpful to understand that, because it's just, I think it is becoming more of an issue just as a separate issue as to why they're basing here. The other question I wanted to ask, there was some negative media coverage a few months back, and it was more to the police actually, but it was about the use of so it was urging people to accept a caution. The parents were urging, and there was some criticism that pressure was being applied on parents to say, well, you on fairly minor things such as inappropriate use of social media and so on. And it was the criticism was mainly directed at the police, but there was a specific reference in the report to pressure being put by a youth offending team to accept a caution. Well, that will get rid of the problem. And the response was, well, yeah, but the problem is that then stays on your record for a long, long time, and the parents were really resisting that, but felt that they were unreasonably pressurised to go for that as a way of sort of closing the case off.
I'll pick up first, and Chris will answer. I think one of the things, I'm not aware of the media report you're referring to, Chair, but one of the pieces of work I think is important to highlight is the work that the Youth Offending Service have done with the police around out-of-court disposals and the increase of out-of-court disposals, particularly to use with young people. And what that does is two things. One is it keeps young people out of the criminal justice system, but it also deals with them in a proportionate way. And some of the success we've seen at reducing the number of first-time entrants has been because we are able to deal with young people outside of the criminal justice system through a process that enables them either to do some restorative work or to receive a kind of warning for their behaviour as well. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the right young people now coming into the criminal justice system, because we have a much bigger menu of things to offer children outside of the court process. But I'll hand over to Chris to give more detail.
In terms of the out-of-court disposals which you're talking about, which is the youth conditional caution and the youth caution, for those to be applied, the young person has to admit the offence in the first place. So we're not able to offer a youth caution or youth conditional caution unless the young person's admitted the offence. If they don't admit the offence, then there's a decision about whether that then goes forward to court and goes through the court process. Because those are the choices, because if they go not guilty, they have to have a trial, so it's then moved to court. It is correct that young people's, if they do get a YCC or a YC, as we call them, then it does remain on. It is a criminal record, and it can be mentioned in future DBS disclosures. And clearly, where you've got the sharing of images, as was the example, I think it was on Radio 4 on a national programme. In the morning, and yes, it is. But we're guided by the how we deal with those cases has guidance from the Chief Police Officer's national organisation, and we follow that guidance. I don't think there are situations, I can't speak for the police, but I haven't heard of situations where we've applied pressure for an out-of-court disposal to be applied. But the range of seriousness with those types of offences, there can be something that's quite innocuous to something that's really quite serious, and the detail of each case is very specific, and you have to make a judgment on what that says to you. But based around the guidance that's already in place and published.
Okay, I think it's helpful that we do understand these issues. Right, are there any further questions or points? Are we all happy to accept this report? It's a good report, nice to see the progress being made. We just hope that we can keep the funding in place to ensure performance continues. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to the next item then. Midlands Connect, sub-national transport body. Anne Carruthers, Director of Environment and Transport, come to present a report which is going to Cabinet on Friday. And this is to make it more put it on a more statutory footing, isn't it? So, would you like to introduce it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Midlands Connect proposing to become a sub-national transport body. They're currently consulting on that, which is what this report is about. As the Chair has mentioned, the report in front of you is going to Cabinet on Friday, so this is the opportunity for me to get your comments on that to feed into that Cabinet decision. A subnational transport body has devolved powers from government, enabling them to do a number of things. One of the key ones of that is developing a regional transport strategy for their area. They are formal partners with government, meaning that they're a statutory consultee. Therefore, government has to take into consideration their views when they are consulted. Doesn't obviously, however, always change the government's formal response, but they do have to give weight to that response from a subnational transport body. Government do appear to be setting quite a lot of store by subnational transport bodies, as demonstrated by the quote that's in this report. Government issued a transport investment strategy last year. Paragraph 28 gives that quote, and increasingly we're seeing there's indications that government want to see this kind of body and want to be interacting with that kind of body on behalf of regions. To become a subnational transport body, the body itself must apply and put forward proposals in terms of the powers that they would want to see, and they obviously have to have the consent of all their constituent parties to that subnational transport body. That then needs to be considered by government and goes through the parliamentary process to get royal assent before actually technically it can become a subnational transport body. Midlands Connect currently is a voluntary body. It's got 16 local transport authorities on it, including the West Midlands Combined Authority, as well as the LEPs, the Local Enterprise Partnerships for the area, business representatives, DFT, and other various agencies such as Highways England and Network Rail. The current proposal for Midlands Connect then to become a subnational transport body, it will provide them the duty to produce the regional transport strategy, which has to be agreed by all the partners. And what that will do is steer investment priorities for that area in terms of transport investment. So government will be looking at that to see where they would want to prioritise and see funding going, because the area itself has decided that's its priorities. Membership can only be local transport authorities. However, there are non-constituent, non-voting members, as set out in paragraph 33 of the report, includes DFT, Highways England, HS2, Network Rail, etc., as those non-voting members. The diagram under paragraph 34 shows you the proposed governance structure, because again, this is all part of the application to government to become subnational transport body. You see there's a partnership board there. That's all the elected members from the local transport authorities in entirety. So representatives of each local transport authority that's a member of the Midlands Connect subnational transport body would be on that partnership board. There's only a small number of things that a partnership board are required to oversee. Firstly is the sign-off of the regional transport strategy. Secondly, there's budgetary decisions, and the third element of that is any constitutional governance type changes. Beyond that, the bulk of the work and the decisions are anticipated at being that next level down, which is the Midlands Connect Strategic Board. And that is, for our area, there would be two elected members representing the East Midlands on that strategic board. And for your information at the moment, I'm sure you're aware, our leader is currently on the strategic board of Midlands Connect in its current entity. Below that, there's a steering group, which is an officer group, the Midlands Connect team, and then various technical advisory groups, depending on the streams of work that are coming out. One of the key issues being raised as part of the consultation is voting options on the few occasions, and they are anticipating there are few occasions, but whoever knows with these things, that they cannot achieve a consensus approach to something. The voting options are firstly, they're set out in paragraph 42 for you, but the first one is a population basis option on the basis of 200,000 population, there would be one vote. The second one is purely one member per vote. Now, the table that's set out under that, further down there, shows you the impact of that and the number of votes for each individual area. For our area, for Leicestershire, we would have 3 votes for our population, obviously being about 680,000. And that is the population weighted vote is the one that we are recommending, just on the basis of that actually is probably a fairer mechanism in order to take those decisions for the few that cannot be agreed. The transport functions, there's a whole range of functions, but the core ones that they are proposing are obviously producing the transport strategy, providing advice to the Secretary of State and operating as that statutory consultee role, coordinating any major initiatives, and the types of things they're talking about are smart ticketing, etc., across the region, and also, interestingly, making proposals to the Secretary of State on any additional powers they could have that would enable more efficiency across that region in terms of transport. At the moment, there isn't anything envisaged and there are no proposals under that. The timelines for the process, as with any of these things, aren't always quick. They are hoping to submit to DFT with a proposal in the autumn this year, but that will be subject, obviously, to the constituent authorities signing off the final version of their proposal prior to that. Then they anticipate around 18 months' worth of negotiations with government and parliamentary process, and hopefully coming into existence in spring 2020. The recommendations in the report that will go to Cabinet are set out in paragraph 2, and that's broadly to agree in principle, support the population-based voting, and report back to Cabinet with the final recommended approach. And we very much appreciate committee's views on this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I think we're particularly interested in the scrutiny arrangements that don't seem to be that clear yet, how that might work, and we appreciate you coming back when there's more clarification on that. But just to put a couple of clarifications, Para 43 then sets out the list, and it's basically the East Midlands and the West Midlands. I know it's got difficulties, but where's Northamptonshire then? Have they chosen to go somewhere else?
Northamptonshire looks south to the partnership below us is England's economic heartland, and they are part of that. They're not part of Midlands Connect.
And that's their choice to do that?
Yes, yeah, that's the way things have evolved over the last few years.
Right, it just further adds to the power of the West, doesn't it? It means the West has even got more authorities and more population without Northamptonshire. That was just, and then Power 48, the 5 key transport functions, and then below there's only 4. Did one get dropped out?
Sorry, I think that's a typo.
So yes. It was always 4?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you might want to correct that.
Yeah, no.
I assumed that there were 5.
BDIs there, well done.
One got dumped as not...
No, there are 5. Yeah, it's the A, B to E. It's the A to E, not the Roman numerals. It's the bold headings.
Well, it says the 5 key transport. Ah, right. That's not core functions. It's the whole lot. I've got you. That's the bit that's not clear then. Okay, that's great. Now, I have Michael Charlesworth.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my concern, Simon's already alluded to it, but it's quite a big pond, this, and we're quite a small fish in it. And on page 39, we've got a list of our priorities, as I imagine every other authority has their list of priorities. I don't. I mean, it goes on to mention the voting system, and there's no veto. I suppose there'll be a pecking order sorted out by the strategic board, and then submit it to government. Any proposals going forward, and I just wonder, how do we ensure we get our stuff basically on the pecking board? That's my primary concern. No veto. I mean, if we had something which we didn't want in Leicestershire, well, we want a lot of stuff in Leicestershire, but if there was something put forward by the others that we didn't want, we've got no veto, so we would have to live with something we might not want. Is that the case?
Thank you. Just pick up those couple of points. In terms of the point about us being small fish, I think that's one of the things we have to, in terms of how it's set out there in terms of the representatives. So we've got 2 representatives from the East Midlands, leaders, etc. So they have tried very carefully to make that balance. I think we in the East particularly know we have got a challenge and an uphill challenge in terms of counteracting some of the weight, and I think some of the things you're referring to from the West Midlands. And that's why we've got the likes of things like Transport for the East Midlands has been established, and we're having those conversations with those other authorities there, so that we've often got then an agreed position on something, so that when we do enter into the likes of Midlands Connect, we are all saying the same thing. So it's not just us as Leicestershire, it's us as the East Midlands talking as one, because it's the same issue for Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, etc. Nobody wants to be that one small fish and everybody else is doing something else, or your voice isn't heard. So we are actually really strengthening those relationships in the East Midlands so that we can counter some of that weight in the West Midlands. Because to be fair, they've been operating in combined authority for much longer time. They've been set up in these types of partnerships in a lot longer than we have. They're established. Government is aware of them. They put weight by that. So we're having to kind of play catch up. But there are mechanisms and conversations continually going on to actually help strengthen our role in that. So I do take your point, but I do think it is about actually those ongoing conversations, particularly in the East Midlands context, so that we are all saying with one voice. So it's not just us as one voice saying, we want something different. In terms of you saying our priorities set out there on page 39, they are actually the priorities in the Midlands Connect Transport Strategy, which was issued about a year ago now. Yes, it was a year ago now. It was March last year. So as you can see, we've done quite well in getting in what we would consider priorities for the county actually translating into the Midlands Connect strategy. So it's not us as Leicestershire shouting about them. Midlands Connect are saying to government, this is our priorities. And, by the way, actually, that would be great because we'll get some benefits for Leicestershire when we're securing funding and investment in some of these. So the key is about that conversation into the centre. Government looks to be holding store by it. So the more we have either at our level, TFEM level, Transport for the East Midlands, or Midlands Connect, if it becomes a subnational transport body as well, the more we're saying the same thing, the same message, hopefully the more weight that has, the more chance we have of securing that investment into it. In terms of the no veto element, the at the top of page 43, there's a bit more detail there in terms about what you can and can't do. Supermajority is required, so decision will require both a supermajority, so that consists of 2/3 of the weighted vote in favour of the decision, or a simple majority, and no single authority could have a veto. At least 9 members would need to vote in favour of either scenario. They're trying to cover as many bases as they can. Yes, I'm sure there's probably some weaknesses in the system. However, at the moment, the officer view is actually we're relatively comfortable in that going forward as a basis to work on. As I say, if it comes to fruition as a subnational transport body, the mechanism to change governance arrangements if they are not working for the partners is via that partnership board. So there is a mechanism there that can look at that and change these things if for whatever reason they do feel they are not working. Sorry, could I just take the opportunity to come back on the one point I think I didn't cover from you, Chair, which was the scrutiny arrangements. That's one of the things we're feeding back to get more detail on those scrutiny arrangements. My view at the moment is actually they just haven't worked them up yet, which is something we would need to understand before we could fully comment and obviously would fully sign something off as an authority.
OK, thanks for that. Right, got quite a bit of interest in this. Got 6 people who want to speak. Alan, you're next.
It's to do with the voting. I gather the group consists of business people as well, is that correct?
Not as a voting member of the actual subnational transport body, no. The only voting members are the local transport authorities.
And so, therefore, the local transport authorities, they would be elected members, correct? OK, that was the question, because we went through this before where one other group, a year or so ago, we had non-elected members who were expected to vote and it was legally not allowed. It has to be elected members. So I was just checking, wasn't sure. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a point of clarification. David Slater.
Thank you, Chairman. I have been quite close to this for the past 4 or 5 years, and we've been asked to express our views, so I'd like to make it more of a statement than a question, Chairman, with your permission. And it seems to me that what's proposed here is the only show in town that can give us any sizable and meaningful infrastructure. And we've got a list there at 25, which I think is paragraph 25, which I think is very good, and I agree that we have done, excuse me, we've done very well out of this. So I think I would support it going forward. Voting arrangements, I don't suppose there'll be many greatly contested votes, because all the people around this table are going to be of a similar mind. So, as far as I'm concerned, the 1 in 200 population is fine. Where I do think there needs to be some work done is on the scrutiny arrangements. There's little or no information in here about it, and I think you said, Anne, that you don't have any either. So I think what we need to do is maybe make some suggestions that possibly the scrutiny committee should not be a rehash of the existing body scrutinising itself. Maybe a scrutiny committee ought to be open to general members of the scrutiny commissions of each of the member authorities. I think that would give it a wider scrutiny base and a more meaningful and hopefully more helpful base for the scrutiny operation to carry on. So I think all in all, I'm very pleased with this, and I think it'll work well.
Yes, I agree with your last point about how the scrutiny works, that effectively it's not just another executive member wearing a different hat, because that won't be proper scrutiny.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that, in my opinion, that's what's happened with the police and crime panel. Most of the authorities have just appointed their lead member on community safety, haven't they? So that's not really scrutiny. So yes, but I doubt if that will be in our gift to control.
Well, hopefully it's part of the recommendation that we have made here, if everybody's in agreement, that we recommend it to Cabinet, and hopefully Cabinet will carry that forward in their recommendation to, in their agreement.
So what we're saying is, in order to have transparent and effective scrutiny, then it should be drawn from within the scrutiny bodies of each transport authority. Is that
that was my suggestion?
Is that a fair summary? Can we? Are we happy to feed that back? That's our view on how it ought to work. No? Okay.
Just to interject, I mean, paragraph 40 then goes on to say that there can be other constituent members of the scrutiny. I would be more than happy for outside bodies who are very important to the Midlands Connect, how it affects them, whether it be passengers, road users, employers, being part of that scrutiny function as well.
I don't think that's precluding non-elected members at all. It's just saying that the way that scrutiny members get onto that body ought to come from within the scrutiny committees or scrutiny bodies of the local transport authority, rather than them effectively being an executive member. That's the difference I think we're making, isn't it?
That's right.
To get effective. Are you happy on? Well, not. Are you clear what we're suggesting there?
More than happy to feed that back to Cabinet.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, I've now got David Jennings.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr Pearson has raised one of the 2 points that I wanted to raise, so I'll just agree with what he said. And I did like what Mr Slater said as well. But under paragraph 25, there's a list of potential projects that could affect Leicestershire. Now, these may be into the future, but I am aware of the concern expressed already by residents of Leicestershire who are concerned that these are going to happen. Well, quite frankly, maybe they will, maybe they won't. but I don't know a deputation is visiting a Leicestershire MP in the next week or so to object to some of these proposals. But it's not even certain they're going ahead. So it would be good if we could press to get definite statements of intent so we know what is to go ahead and what isn't, because I do believe people have a right to know. And at the moment, no, there's nothing definite.
If you could just clarify on that, that list there is, as I say, what's in the Midlands Connect transport strategy that was published last year. So this is what they're saying with a whole host of other things. These are the ones that are particularly pertinent to our county. This is what they're saying is they see as priorities for the region moving forward in terms of growth, etc. What this means, and it's different for each of the projects because they're at different stages, and you'll know that when you scan up and down the list, is for some of them it will be early feasibility. So they'll go through the early feasibility and either it'll stack up or it won't stack up, so it'll go to the next stage, etc. There isn't the ability at the moment for the whole list of projects to say it'll definitely go ahead, it won't. Each one will take its course, and either it'll get to the end and it'll be delivered over whatever timescale, or somewhere along the line, because policy changes, the economy changes, for whatever reason, it's no longer sensible to take forward. So we're not in a position we can say definitively this will get delivered in X year. Each one needs to take its course, but what we can say is Midlands Connect consider them a priority for investigation and development at this point in time.
You happy with that, David?
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask my question, can I just seek a bit of clarification? Because I thought I'd got my one grey cell round something I clearly haven't. So I understand about the obviously the constituent board. I've got no problem with one vote per 200,000. But I think you said, Anne, in your introduction that board only has limited things to set the budget, etc. You said the majority of the decisions would be made by the strategic board, which, from my point of view, is then heavily weighted in our favour, because there are 3 representatives from the East Midlands and 3 representatives from the West Midlands. So in actual fact, the East Midlands does proportionately better by number of population on the strategic board compared to the West Midlands, which I think is a brilliant thing. Is my understanding of that correct before I ask my question?
I think the key thing is that under the actual guidance that the government has put out about subnational transport bodies, it's saying that the full partnership, i.e. the widest thing, all the constituent authorities, etc., which obviously can, in certain areas like ours, and the only one that has got over the line so far, Northern Powerhouse, is considerable. Actually, there's certain things that they have to, on their own, they have to take the decision on. You can't delegate it to a subcommittee, etc. And those are the things they've specified. Those 3 things I mentioned, the transport strategy, the budget, etc. They're the things they've specified that widest partnership, the whole partnership, are the only element of the governance that can take the decisions. Beyond that is up to each subnational transport body to decide what they want to delegate. And at the moment, there isn't more detail on that beyond the Midlands Connect proposal being, yes, we understand that those key decisions need to be taken at the widest partnership level. I do think my own view is these things will work out, because I don't think they anticipate there's going to be key decisions taken at a lot of the work will be consensus. It won't be of significance enough to require any kind of vote, etc. So they will have the ability to say, right, we want this to go to the partnership, or it will be dealt with at the steering board. And I do think that the steering group, I do think that will come out through the actual process. However, as I say, the only things that are specified that must be decided at that highest level are those specific 3 items. Sorry, I'm not sure if that helps you in entirety.
No, I think it does. I think it'll just be evolving and we'll see where we are. But I mean, I just like the fact that the largest conurbation is actually saying on that strategic board, which would do a lot of work, we're happy to go 50-50 between East and West Midlands, which I think is a really nice approach. And that was the point I was trying to get over, that I don't think the East Midlands necessarily is being disadvantaged. I think it could be advantaged by the fact of that collegiate work in they're clearly wanting to put in place. Now, my other question will take you into the world of fantasy, so bear with me on this one. I wake up in 3 months' time in a parallel universe, and the other Sajid Javid has signed off the combined authority bid, bear with me, how would that affect the governance of this? Would we merge? Would we then have one representative from Leicester and Leicestershire with the combined number of votes? And is that allowed for in these documents? So have they allowed for combined authorities being board within the terms of reference for the Midlands Connect?
Sorry, my thing was still on. In terms of well, obviously they've allowed for combined authorities because they've accounted for the West Midlands combined authority. So there's a precedent, there. It's not a new thing. I'm probably not the best person to answer your question on this. However, my understanding in terms of your realms of fantasy is that won't happen in 3 months. Combined authorities. Combined authority bid at the moment has been, it's gone quiet, etc. All I would say to you is, obviously, we'd have to have the discussion, if that did happen, with Midlands Connect about how we manage it, what that would mean in terms of the voting. But there's certainly a precedent being set there following the West Midlands Combined Authority. So I don't think it would be beyond the realms of being able to manage within that construct.
You've got touche there. Right. David Bill.
Picking up that last point, I think the one thing we can be assured of is that the West Midlands will always come out better funded than the East Midlands. So it's a pattern which has been evolving for years, and all the signs are that is going to endure. Simply because the West Midlands has agreed on a mayor, and nobody in the East Midlands will agree to a mayor, and therefore the government is putting all its cash into the West Midlands. I've got a problem as a member of this Scrutiny Commission, and that is I was looking at the minutes of the last meeting that we had, where we were talking about the strategic growth plan, which is obviously inextricably linked to this, and that is that even though issues are raised at scrutiny level, by the time it comes through to the Cabinet, the report is that something about members were generally in agreement. So it doesn't matter what's raised here, all the Cabinet sees is that members are generally in agreement. Therefore, I think I'm going to have to once again ask that my views are expressed somewhere, because I want to be consistent. Going back to the points that David Jennings raised, that of the bullet points listed under paragraph 25, there are of course schemes there which we've been pressing for to my knowledge, for 20 or more years. The rail links, the top two, the Leicester to Coventry rail link, enhancement to Leicester to Birmingham rail connections, and then the other issue being the A5 expressway. And of those three items, I don't think there's anybody would have any disagreement with whatsoever. And then we've got other issues listed there where there is controversy, to say the least. The A46 expressway might well be, and it is indeed, in the Midlands Connect agenda, and it has been for some time. But it's only come to notice of this county council in recent months, with the production of our own strategic growth plan proposals, which we are presumably still consulting on. In other words, we haven't come to a conclusion. At least I hope we haven't. And that won't conclude until the April the 5th. Therefore, people have still got time to express their views on that. And the basic question I've been asking all the way through this is, what is the impact of the proposed new road on our local road network? And I've been to everybody on this. I've been to our own officers, who have quite rightly said that it's only a vision and they've got no information. I've been to Highways England on it, because they presumably will be responsible for this road, and therefore must have some idea of what it's going to do to the local road network. And they've said, oh well, it hasn't really reached them yet, they're not considering it. Therefore, I have a real issue with this, is that we are promoting a major project here, where we have no knowledge whatsoever of what impact it's going to have on the countryside, on the roads, on the people who live here. We know it will open up growth, and we've seen that. We're seeing this. We're seeing this in South Leicestershire now. We're seeing major sheds being created, some with rail connections, some without, but with I'm afraid, very little employment other than for HGV drivers, which is welcome in itself, but that's all it is. And we touched on this morning, the need for improved employment prospects, not just similar employment prospects we have here. So I've got concerns about that being in the list at this stage. And I think I've got to ask Rosemary if she could actually record my concerns on that. But finally on this, we've been here for so long promoting major improvements for road and rail in Leicestershire, but to my knowledge, the amount of work that's been achieved on the ground has been minimal. You reminded me lunchtime, Chairman, we were discussing this. We had the Earl Shilton bypass, which was agreed here 30 years ago, and about 10 years ago we finally achieved it. We achieved the Market Harborough, the A6 bypass. We achieved that 20 years ago. But other than that, since the creation of the M69, which was built in about 1972, I don't think we've had any major road or rail improvements agreed across the county. The A46, of course, the northern that bypass. Yes, I do. Yes, that was built in the north of the county. But as far as the south of the county is concerned, I don't think that, despite all the pressure that has been applied over the years, anything major has really been achieved. And I do wonder whether this is yet just another exercise in yet another talking shop, putting bids forward to the government, when we're going to be told at the end of the day, well, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong part of the country. This is your part of the country always comes out of the bottom when it comes to investment, and it's going to continue that way. I'm sorry to be cynical about it, but I would like to see some evidence that someone in authority somewhere has any confidence that any of these schemes will in fact go ahead. Thank you, Chairman.
Can you? I mean, you said at the beginning this is to support a bidding process, really. That this body's being put in place to bid for schemes and funds, so that this is to make it more effective. Hopefully, is that?
The overall intention of creating a subnational transport body is to have a formal constituted body that has got clear powers that government has agreed to and then interacts with, rather than the voluntary body we have. It doesn't necessarily mean that that body is all about just bidding, purely because we as local transport authorities will have to continue to bid through various different forms. The government will still put money out, I'm sure, directly to local transport authorities. I'm sure there will be opportunities for that for Midlands Connect, but it's not just about that. It's about the influencing. And what government is saying is, if you have constituted yourself in that way, we will be listening to you, because you're a statutory consultee and it gives more weight than anywhere else. There's a couple of points I could pick up if I could, if that's all right, Chair. Firstly, on the A46, I'd like to separate out probably the strategic growth plan from subnational transport bodies, which we're here to talk about today. We talked about strategic growth plan last time. Under the Midlands Connect, as you see in that list there that's been referred to several times, actually Midlands Connect have identified the A46 as a priority that they see for the region because of potential benefits across the region in terms of connectivity, that southwest to northeast movement, and giving greater resilience to the network, allowing growth and giving relief to places like the motorway network around Birmingham. As a result of that, they have commissioned study work that is underway and has been going underway for some time now into what those benefits are and how that might look like in future, etc. So Midlands Connect themselves have identified that as a priority for them among this list of other ones and wider ones across the region as well. The other point I would want to pick up is, and marginally disagree with, is the element about, if you look in the past, we've influenced and we've bid, etc., and we haven't achieved much at all. In comparison to some areas we may have achieved, less, etc. We've all seen the figures about, what other areas of the country get, including the South East and London. However, what I would say, if you looked at a map 20, 30, 50 years ago of Leicestershire and looked at a map today, you will see the considerable transport investment that has gone on over that time period. And actually, we're all very good at forgetting what it used to be like 5, 10 years, 20 years ago. All of us are. And even I had a report the other day that I had officers look for me, and we have done something like secured 92 million pounds of external funding for transport infrastructure in the last 5 years. Now, I wouldn't say that was insignificant, investment in the county. So I would, dispute that last fact. And one final point I would make. While this may be another round of, the latest thing government would like us to do, etc., if we do not comply with it and if we do not go with it, we will be the outliers getting less money. We'll certainly have less chance because we will not be working collaboratively with one voice, agreeing on our priorities across a region for significant investment that government will listen to. So we will be out in the cold, and I will say probably without going down routes like this, we will have less chance of getting funding otherwise.
Okay, Rosita.
Well, there isn't much for me left on my list. It was, there were points I kind of scribbled down: clarity of governance, fair geographical spread, and all of these things are very much addressed. I've also noted on point 25, David said, could we have a definite statement of intent? No, it's a wish list. We may never get any, and if we get one, but the game has changed. You said in the past 92 million were secured, but now we're talking a future massive building agenda. And therefore, we need more than just one scheme. We need this body to secure us the necessary infrastructure. Otherwise, I'm afraid we are in the Swanee. I kind of, just a minor point, I can't get my head around the voting metrics. By the way, there's a typo under Derby. They're getting 7, but they should just read 1. Now, as it is within the 200 populations, some are rounded up, some are rounded down, and there is no actual pattern to this, because normally if you're working a math, if you're going to 55, you're going up. If you're going under 50, you're going down. And, say, for instance, some authorities got less population than us, but they still got 3 voting points. And anyway, while I'm waffling, where I can't get my head around, it is if these votes are utilised, and we need to look forward to where everybody is going to look at a building agenda, everybody is going to be fighting. So your votes at the end of the day matter, because if you want 3/4, and so what I'm trying to say here, do you feel, because no doubt officers have worked it out, is this a fair representation? So it's not going to be top-heavy to larger authorities like West Midland when the vote comes eventually, between East and West. So that is just a simple question. And the other thing I was wondering, it is in the actual terms later on, could there be more clarity of governance in line with what Terry said? Because when you're looking at delivering these items under 25, we are not talking just a year or two. We could have a change of government. Everything is possible. And if we don't have clear governance in the terms of reference, you could all be back to square one, if you see what I mean. So...
If I just comment perhaps on the voting, in particular about the rounding, I think what they've done in every case is rounded up, and I'm sure you'll probably point out one or two to me where they've not done that, with obviously the exception I take on board about, and apologies for the typo for Derby, is one vote per every 200,000. So Rutland there at 38,000 still gets one vote. Therefore, if you've got 314 as Nottingham City Council have 314,000, rather than just having one vote because you had 200,000, they've given you the benefit of the doubt too. They've always rounded up to the next higher. If you've got more than a 200,000 denomination, they've rounded you up to the next one, is my understanding how it's worked. In terms of the fairness, I mean, I do know from the officers involved in this, and the Midlands Connect officers, they have been round the houses as to how they could divvy this up. There was even a proposal, originally that, it was one vote per 38,000, because that takes it to the lowest common denominator, i.e. Rutland, in terms of the smallest population size. But you can, West Midlands got 200 and something votes, So, it's all quite... So they have been round the houses on this. It's not perfect, I think, everybody acknowledges. I do think that they feel that they've probably got to the fairest system they can at this point in time.
Because I was just simply looking at, for instance, if you're talking Leicestershire, Lincolnshire has only got 60,000 more, but yet they've got a whole vote more. And then, if you're looking like Worcestershire, they've got 100,000 less, and they've got the same, you see. So it just sort of doesn't, it doesn't have a smooth sort of pattern you can follow, but...
Right, I think we've given this report a good airing. I'm sorry, Terry, and Mark wanted to come back. Absolutely. Sorry, I forgot you. Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, quickie really. It seems that the debate is focused on whether or not the risk is greater of being left behind if we're in it, because we're left behind within it, or left behind because we're not in it. And I guess I'm generally an optimistic sort of person, would tend to assume that we're probably better off in it, and working with big partners to lever stuff into the Midlands. And then, of course, I think of my own little obsession with the Ivanhoe line, which was mentioned in the minutes of the last meeting as an aspiration for this council. So my simple question would be, given that obviously that line would benefit the Leicester to Birmingham connectivity, are we better off, if that is an aspiration, in it, or is it just as likely to get pushed down the list as it always has done for the last 20 odd years, or should I be siding with Councillor Bill and becoming a pessimist?
I couldn't possibly get into that latter debate. I'll leave that one entirely for you. Just in terms of Midlands Connect, they have got some fairly high-level priorities in terms of rail at the moment, and to be fair, they're working through those. And there are the key ones are the roundabout, the Birmingham Rail Hub, which has benefits for us because it frees up paths into Birmingham, which enables more connectivity from Leicester, but also for us the Leicester to Coventry direct line possibility. They're doing that. So I think it's fair to say Ivanhoe line definitely isn't on the list at the moment. They're working on some higher level priorities. I wouldn't ever say it would never get there. I think there's other things and avenues that we're looking at in the moment, particularly in relation to the government's rail strategy that they announced last year, and trying to get a bit more clarity about the positive words in that and what it means in a real tangible way, to see if there's any mileage in terms of then supporting and progressing that Ivanhoe line case. But as we all know, it's got lots of challenges, needs lots of money, and there's no connection into Leicester Station, which are some of the key issues we'd have to work over.
Michael, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just quickly, Chair. I think the voting metrics are fine, I mean, the dividing line between Lincolnshire and Leicestershire was 700,000. So I think it's as fair a scheme as you say, anybody was going to come up with. Going back to Mr. Richardson's point about the strategic board being fairly balanced, great, but most of the decisions will be on the partnership board. So I want to know what your version of consensus is. It mentions it on paragraph 41, consensus. What's your definition of consensus? Because you can swing it either way. It doesn't have to be all partners agreeing. Consensus can be a majority. So I want more clarity about that.
I mean, I think at the moment the closest thing we've got there is that paragraph 44 in terms of, you know, the levels you have to achieve in order to, you know, for your voting, etc. I know in talking to the officers that have been involved in this, in terms Midlands Connect officers, they are very much of the view, and the ethos is, we never know until we get there in reality, however, that actually there will be minimal times that they require a vote. The decisions will not require a vote. They don't feel they will get to that point because you will not have many things that are significant enough. It's a straight yes or no, etc. When you think about it, a lot of the things going through are, here's a report on the feasibility study on whatever of those priorities on that list, etc. This is where we've got to. Do you know, there's lots of work. The vast majority of the work of Midlands Connect is going to be around stuff like that. I think there's going to be a very small element of things where you would ever get to a point they're going to need to take a vote. I take your point. We still need to understand the fine details of what that means for consensus and what triggers that final vote and how that operates then, which is certainly something we can feed back to them as part of this level of the consultation.
Yeah, just to be absolutely precise, it says there, the paragraph, decisions will be made by the partnership board, normally made by consensus, and as you say, not going to the formal vote. So the majority of the decisions will be made consensus, not formal vote. So we do need to understand exactly what consensus means in this context.
I mean, I can certainly put to them, I think the spirit of the intention is, obviously, the partners round the board can get to a point they agree, some either compromise or approach to whatever the issue is. It's not about they've got some major disagreements in terms of approach, response, you know, whatever the issue is. It's got to be they can get to either some compromise or they're all roughly in agreement about the next step.
Okay.
One more thing, Chair. What is the mechanism for reporting back to the various constituent authorities going forward?
Well, at the moment, actually, as you know, the leader sits on the strategic board and we have various boards underneath that where either I'm involved or officers are, depending on the technical work that's going on. I think that's a very good point. We need to think about how we firm up those arrangements if and when this becomes a subnational transport body. At the moment, the way it happens, in terms of, because there's no decision making at Midlands Connect, anything that requires a decision, we will need to come through both the scrutiny and the cabinet process. So that's the mechanism at the moment. I think it's a good point actually though to think about formalising that if and when it becomes a subnational transport body.
I think that is important that we get some feedback, because the thing about these bodies is they go off and then you never hear what's going on. So for the rest of us that would be extremely useful. Obviously we can call the leader to this commission as and when required. Okay, so there are some unanswered questions, particularly around how the scrutiny arrangements are going to vote, and some more clarity to be gained on a number of operational details of how it's going to work. David, you want your concerns to be noted in relation to history and the likely effectiveness of it, and the schemes. The schemes at this point in time which haven't been subject to full assessment yet. That's ongoing, isn't it? The need, the economic rate and so on and so forth. So subject to that then, if there's no other comments, we'll forward those comments?
I know that Terry here has called me a pessimist, but I've been here so long. I can remember 30 years ago we created a regional transport authority. We've been through this exercise. Every 10 years we just reinvent the wheel and go through exactly the same process. We call it a slightly different name, but things don't really move forward that far. All I'm saying, I've been here so long. I've seen the same thing happening over and over again. And we're back to the days of Tommy Thompson and Donald Saby, where all these things were put together, and it was all going to be wonderful, and then somehow everything changed, and we're back to square one. And now this is about the fourth time we've reinvented the regional. This time a regional transport authority, and I wish it well. But
it's usually government policy that drives it in the end. Yep.
Could I just say, I mean, I've lived here 30 years and I've seen huge amounts of change in the highways, even on the B4114, the A6. It's just wrong to say that nothing's changed. We've had no infrastructure. I mean, you know, I can't support those comments going on. I completely side with Anne that we've had huge amounts. And if I understood what David Bill was saying earlier, he's on the one hand saying we get no infrastructure, but by the way, when we're looking at it, I don't want it anyway. So, you know, I mean, you know, he says that all of us would want an enhancement to Leicester Birmingham rail concessions. Well, we might do, but we don't know the plans, and therefore there might be major impacts on houses. The logic of this is we wait to see what the impact is and then make a decision then. But the aspiration surely has got to be that we want growth in Leicestershire for the benefit of our residents. And I find it strange, you know, to note the comments. I mean, I'd like to hopefully we note the comments of the majority of us that think that this is the only game in town and this is the only way we will get infrastructure to benefit our residents in Leicestershire. And I'd certainly, want that put in the report.
OK. That will be summarised. Let's move on. Thank you very much, Anne. East Midlands Shared Service performance update. This is the annual update on the performance of the East Midlands Shared Service. Welcome to the meeting, Lucy Littlefair, Head of the East Midlands Shared Service. And also here is Brian Roberts, Director of Corporate Resources. Which one of you would like to lead off?
I'm going to lead off, Chairman, only very briefly, and then hand over to Lucy. I think, obviously, the Commission has been involved with the EMSS since its inception, going back to 2010 and that, and I've always valued the interest and the contribution that's been made by this Commission over the years and that. It had a difficult start, and again, the Commission will be aware of that, but it's steadily improved and it's delivered very significant savings to both authorities in terms of that. And I think, my personal view is that a lot of the improvements, and when we turn the corner on this, goes back to the time we appointed Lucy to head up this service, and that very significant improvements. And I'd like to just publicly recognise everything that Lucy has done. There is some information in terms of the performance, but I've asked Lucy to really focus on the commercial opportunities that we now can see going forward, and obviously the interaction with what we've called Fit for Change, which is the replacement of the Oracle system. So if Lucy could just go through those, obviously any details around the performance of the service, again, Lucy can answer any questions on them.
Thank you, Brian. OK, so I've detailed in the report, as I do on a yearly basis, our performance and also some of our strategic priorities. Our joint committee agreed a strategic plan for EMSS back in 2015. That was a 3-year plan, but what we did was we took a 1-year plan through to them last June just to really do as a refresh and bring things up to date. And what we're doing at the moment is we're just drafting the 3-year plan, which will take us all the way through to 2021. Really, for EMSS, 2015, I came into post 2014. That was all about stabilisation. Things were there were some difficulties and some challenges at that time. And 2015-16 actually was all about laying the foundations for the future years. from a joint committee perspective, from a partner's perspective, EMSS was set up very much around delivering high quality services to both partners, but also about looking to the future in terms of our commercial opportunities. And in the last year, 2017, we've managed to be able to focus on 2 new key business opportunities. The first one being with Nottingham University Hospital. So those of you who are familiar with Nottingham, that's the Queen's Medical Centre and the City Hospital. So they've been conducting an assessment as part of the STP on the options available for providing their financial payroll and procurement transactional services, and approached EMSS as one of those options alongside a do-nothing option, as alongside an outsourcing to the private sector, as well as setting something up as a health just a health-orientated shared service. National steer through the STP is very much around, even for the size of organisation of NUH, they should be looking at consolidating their services and sharing them as a way forward. So they conducted a feasibility study, and EMSS, throughout all of their kind of criteria and ratings, came out as the best overall option for them. And following approvals within both organisations, and this has been through to our joint committee, works commenced on developing a full business case, which will explore a 2-phase approach. So the first phase is all about collaboration, and we're able to do that through some public service contract regulations, which enable us to share staff and to deliver services to each other. And we're looking to do that over the next 2 years, and if that proves successful, to then commence work on creating a single entity. Because what health aren't able to do is join our joint committee arrangements. We would need to look to do something separate, potentially a company structure, if that proves successful. I guess what I've been really keen to make sure is that, you know, this isn't all about what NUH and what health and the benefits they're going to get. They're very keen to come under the EMS brand, which is fantastic for us, but there's got to be something in it, I guess, for EMSS. For me, it fits with our overall vision, which was all about delivering high-quality, resilient services to the public sector. I think in our minds we were initially limiting that to local government, but health potentially, you know, offers that opportunity to expand into a totally new sector. We've already there are already 2 organisations within health within the East Midlands, one quite a large organisation, one is smaller, who are also already very interested. They are with a private sector provider at the moment, and are experiencing some challenges and difficulties and are very interested in what we're doing. So more work to be done on that. We're literally at the stages. We're hoping to take that final business case through to joint committee in May, with all then the legal arrangements in place to commence that collaboration in late summer. So that's been kind of a key focus for us over the last 12 months. The other kind of new avenue really for EMSS has been the provision of a payroll service for those citizens and service users in receipt of direct payments. So I was approached by Nottingham City Council, who'd done an analysis of their current provision, which is all outsourced, to ask whether we would consider setting up a payroll service for the 750 citizens of Nottingham who are currently in receipt of direct payments and actually employ individuals. Okay. That's actually at the moment provided by private sector providers who are proving very expensive, and the level of service provided isn't particularly good. This was an area that EMSS we don't do currently, but I was aware that within Leicestershire County Council that a small team existed that was actually in-house that provided those services to the residents of Leicestershire. So in agreement with Director of Finance, Director of Adults and Communities, that team's actually transitioned only a couple of weeks ago into EMSS. And we're already commenced our discussions with Nottingham around how quickly are we able to offer that to the citizens of Nottingham and actually to bring that business back in-house and back into EMSS. And I think once we've got that partnership offering, then to a certain extent we'd like to market that more widely. We understand a number of councils, this is a key challenge for them, largely in terms of the costs of those private sector providers, and we believe that we can provide that efficient service in-house. So they're the two main areas of growth for us and commercial opportunity that we've considered over 2017. And really then just to touch on the other key focus for us is around our technology. So as part of EMSS, there's a shared IT platform, which is Oracle, which Leicestershire County Council have had in place since 1992. Not quite that version. We have moved on, but ultimately we've been working with Oracle for a number of years, and Nottingham City came on board with that in 2012. But it's recognised that the version of Oracle that we've got at the moment is highly customised, and actually in terms of products that are out there, we can enhance that functionality by going forward. And I understand that Roderick O'Connor has brought reports to yourselves in terms of the Fit for the Future programme, which has been kind of put in place. The Fit for the Future programme, to a certain extent, should realise significant benefits for EMSS. I think Brian alluded to some of the challenges that we've had as a shared service have come about really because of the lack of standardisation in a number of our processes and the way that the system's been set up, and also in terms of the lack of automation. And we believe that actually the product that's been procured, which is Oracle Cloud, should help us actually going forward, not only to provide better services to our partners, but also will be very attractive in terms of a commercial offering to other public sector organisations. And Oracle are already talking to us about how we might be able to work jointly on some of those conversations with organisations, particularly in the East Midlands. So that's quite an exciting kind of prospect for us. Lastly, all I've done within the report then is set out in terms of operational performance for our Employee Service Centre, which is based over here in the Eastern Annex, and the Finance Service Centre, which is based at Nottingham. It would be fair to say that the Employee Service Centre, which is our payroll and all of our HR administration, very robust service, very experienced staff, no challenges at all in terms of performance, in terms of delivery. You'll see 90% customer service satisfaction. So can only really, we're still bringing on new customers. We picked up in 2017 14 academies from Leicester City Council, and whereas we were unsure as to quite what the education market, what would happen in relation to that market, actually we've managed to grow, and some of the early academies that moved away have actually, their auditors have all been recommended that they need to come back to us. So actually that's really pleasing for us. The Finance Service Centre, I've set out in terms of the kind of the volumes and the kind of levels of transactions that we deal with, giving you an idea in relation to the level of debt across a range of customers and the considerable progress that we've made for Leicestershire particularly, as well as Nottingham, progress since 2004, but there's definitely further improvement in relation to the Finance Service Centre. But a lot of that hinges on compliance, and compliance around our invoice processing, the invoices that we receive from suppliers, the levels of those that are rejected on a daily basis is still significantly higher, which means the level of manual intervention ultimately, remains high. So equally, that I think it's the Finance Service Centre that's going to benefit the most really from the Fit for the Future programme. And then I've just set out some overall conclusions for you.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. It sounds very exciting, and it's been, as you said, a long time to get going, but now it looks like it's expanding and will bring some benefits both to the authorities and to the public sector in efficiencies as a whole. You were using lots of abbreviations on the health bodies. Can you just go back over the actual health bodies that are looking to partner with us?
So it's Nottingham University Hospitals, which is made up of the two large hospitals in Nottingham, which is Queen's Medical Centre and the City Hospital. Yeah.
But not UHL in Leicester at this point?
Not at the moment, no.
Clarification. Right. David Slater.
Thank you, Chairman. I applaud the enterprise and very supportive of the work you're doing there. I guess a lot of that has been enabled by moving the IT platform to a cloud-based system. So the question arises in my mind, first of all, what sort of, I don't know whether you can call it profit or surplus, what sort of returns are you getting from going out to third parties? Does that cover the cost of the software costs of the cloud-based system? And the investment in the cloud-based system is recouped, as far as Leicestershire is concerned, over what length of period? I ask this bearing in mind that just as we're about to leave the EU, if we decide to leave the ESS, how is our investment covered if that eventuality arises?
In terms of overall with Oracle Cloud, there's a separate business case about the benefits that we get from that, not just from EMS, but from the wider authority in that. And again, that's been going through Cabinet as an outline business case to justify the investment, and we'll be looking for a payback of the upfront investment over 4 or 5 years in terms of that. Now, part of the payback will be in the efficiencies we will get out from EMS, vastly reducing the need for manual intervention and input, and automate that level of input in terms of that. And I think outside of Oracle, we think there are other opportunities in the digital world where we can, with robotics and things like that we will be looking at, not only in terms of our customer service centre, but we will also be looking at it in terms of EMS that will make these processes really, really efficient. So, but every time we invest in technology, we always do a business case to ensure that we get the payback from that investment up front in terms of that. So the figures behind it and the business case are going through Cabinet and will be scrutinised by this Commission as we go forward.
Terry Arnhem.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very supportive of this report, and I think it's a genuine kind of transformation when you can join together two big authorities and get such savings. I'm very impressed with that. I think the idea of going with Nottingham University Hospitals, I do think they're very lucky. Having been involved in Leicestershire's NHS and seen what happens with the privatisation of financial and payroll services, there's a lot to be said for this kind of joint committee in sourcing. You know, we know we're all on the same side, I hope. What I wanted to wonder was, as I understand it, we haven't actually bought the Oracle Cloud yet. We're going to. That's the business plan. And a couple of questions. One is, well, you just mentioned the payback. 4 to 5 years. Well, in 4 to 5 years, most IT is old anyway. After 4 to 5 years, so what's the kind of rolling programme? Yes, you mentioned robotics. AI intelligence is going to come in. and how are we going to benefit from that? And then from my own experience of moving from one database to a cloud-based database, how are we going to risk, what's the risk of data loss, business discontinuity during that transition phase?
Well, although it's a very exciting project, I think there are some very significant risks, and I think you've highlighted two key ones in that. So, like, the issue for us is really good programme and project management around that, so that we're very clear what the risks are and we mitigate those risks going forward in terms of that. Like, for this to go wrong, then the risk is that people don't get paid, our employees don't get paid, or suppliers don't get their invoices paid and that. So any failures in that area would be very significant, both financially and reputationally, for the two organisations, so that we will plan very carefully on that. And we did have, and again, the chairman no doubt will remember this, that when we first did this back in 2012, there were some backlogs in terms of paying invoices and that, and that was a difficult period of time. And obviously, it was very serious for the smaller businesses, particularly in terms of cash flow and that. So we need to do a lot of work in terms of that. In terms of, I think, in terms of future-proofing it, and I think cloud is much more attractive, because as part of the service you get, there is automatic updating of that system going forward and that. Whereas in the past, you have big sort of upgrades when we do it, and all the risks around that. This is more buying a service and an ongoing service and that. So we hope one of the real benefits from that will be that we will be able to future-proof it and continue to have the best systems that are available at any one time in terms of that. I think financially it's very attractive to us in terms of the savings that we will get from moving from our current arrangements to our new ones. The contract's not signed yet, but there's still some T's and C's to be sorted, and they have to be satisfactory to the two authorities. So until that's finalised, then the contract will not be signed. So we're going through various things on that, but we're pretty close in terms of that and that. So I think it's very significant benefits in there. We think through this cloud, this purchasing of a service rather than software, we will be able to ensure that we stay in the forefront of the best systems at any one time. The commercial benefits of that are huge as well, and Oracle themselves recognise that and are very keen to work with Leicestershire and Nottingham through EMS to exploit that.
Okay, Terry. And then finally I've got Rosie.
And not much left for me, thank you. Quite an ambitious time, but on project. And as David always says, the only game in town. But can you go to paragraph 40 on page 51? As this is a 3-year plan, the Fit for Future programme and the new Oracle Cloud solution are crucial to realising the full benefits and the financial service. So what are the timescales? How do you foresee this? Is this, does this happen early in the 3-year cycle to get the most of the potential? Just talk me through that. Thank you.
Okay, we're just working through the phasing options at the moment, because obviously the level of risk around, as Brian said, not paying your suppliers, your staff. So we're looking at the moment in terms of, is it something we should do big bang, as they say, or should we look to phase it by organisation, or should we look to phase it by function? Ultimately, we have got some end dates in terms of some key contracts, which is our hosting arrangements. That contract ends in March 2020. So ultimately, we've got to have moved on to the new cloud system by then. And at the moment, our kind of thoughts are that really in terms of go-live dates that we might be looking at November 2019. So ultimately, they're the kind of dates that we've got in mind for both the finance and both for the HR payroll. We might do a slight phasing around. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, Alan.
Sorry, just back to the cloud. Obviously, just to clarify, the cloud system's been around a little bit of while now. So, my experience is that you negotiate individual users per day or per week or per cost or group cost, and that can change because obviously you don't own the cloud, somebody else does. So you get a license fee. Is that correct? Is it a number of license fees? The art of these companies, they'll tie you into a license, then put the price up after a period of time, so that obviously you're negotiating that. Is that some of the risk you're talking about, how you manage the license fees and the individual or the group costs and its ongoing cost of the cloud, and how you work that over a number of years? Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. And what we are doing is determining absolutely the number of licenses we believe we need, and assuring ourselves that we've got the right licenses. Oracle licenses is a complex world, and one has to be careful in terms of that. What we are doing is taking two independent assurances from specialists that operate in this world. One will assure us in terms of whether we've got the right licenses and that, and the other one will determine whether we've got value for money, i.e. that we're paying the right amount for the licenses given the other sales that are going on. And I believe, and we will come back in due course, that we will be able to demonstrate very strongly value for money.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we've gained a really good understanding of the flexibility with cloud, as you were saying, about being able to move our licenses about between modules and how often we're able to do that. So it's much, it's very different for the kind of premise solution that we've got at the moment, but we've spent an awful lot of time making sure that we fully understand, how it's going to work in the future and how we get the best out of it, I guess.
Okay. And then obviously you're taking into consideration the new data protection information, which is a right pain. I'm sure you're going to find that. That you'll be obviously on a cloud and on a system that you're talking about will have data, personal data, group data, etc. Obviously, we're going through the right risk assessment in that, so we meet the requirements in the future.
Absolutely. I'm the statutory officer in terms of that and going forward. And again, we've got some wider issues of which this is one element of it. And I dare say in due course, probably the other side of May, when this comes in, this commission will be interested to look at where we are and what the issues are and how we're planning to make sure that we're compliant with those new regulations. But this is definitely one element of it, as it is with all our hard copy files and other applications that we operate which hold personal data.
Chair, just again add to that. Does the system give you the ability for individual data, whatever it is, pay, tax, whatever, for an individual to access with a license? So they actually, I pay you maybe 50 pence a week to have access to a small individual file that gives me all my data, so I can understand, I can read, etc. But we pay you, and then that offsets some of the license fee. Have you got that ability to do that?
No,
you can tell I'm doing it at the moment as well. You can tell I'm in this at the moment. Doing the editing.
Okay. The licensing arrangements are set up by organisation. At the moment, so we have got unit prices per individual employees, yes, but the kind of arrangement you were talking about in terms of individuals being able to access their
and pay for it,
data, I guess everybody at the moment that we're talking about is an employee. So no, we haven't got that arrangement and haven't had those discussions. No.
There is a system. I'm just saying there is a system where you can, Simon, you can. I don't know which company I'm dealing with, one in Italy, but not Italy, Spain. But the system, what the system does allow you, say if you have certain issues with a family member, and there's information put on, you can actually access it. Say you want results for your child or some physical activity stuff, their performance, you can access it on a daily basis, but you pay for that like 50 pence a week, or it's quite cheap, but it's a license. But the company makes additional money. But if you hold the license as you negotiate with Oracle, you can actually hold that and offer that to clients as well. I just don't know whether you could do it. That's all.
What that application would be for us as a council, wouldn't we? As opposed to someone outside of the council. Okay. Paragraph 33, I was personally pleased to see that the debt provision has come down from 4.3 to 2.6 and then now down to 1.6. I think that's really good. There were some embarrassing examples on a list you gave us once, including a couple of district councils that weren't paying their money, but I assume that we haven't got any one that needs a public telling off anymore. Brian, are we? Anyone owes us a lot of money?
No specific district comes to mind at the moment. But if I do become aware of them, I'll make sure you're told, Chairman.
I remember that one. Okay, thank you very much. Well, you bring us this report on an annual basis. It's always very interesting. We're very supportive of this because, in the end, this helps us. Well, it doesn't just keep the business going, but it makes it more efficient and hopefully keeps costs down. So thank you very much. Right, we move now to item 11, east of Lutterworth Strategic Development Area. This matter is also the subject of an exempt report to the Cabinet on Friday the 9th. Our comments will be reported to the Cabinet. Brian Roberts is staying with us, Director of Corporate Finance. John Bennett, Head of Strategic Property, is joining us, and Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, is also present. Which one of you would like to kick off?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to run through where we are with regard to the East of Lutterworth Strategic Development Area, with particularly regard to the emerging Harborough local plan and the land assembly requirements therein. As Chair pointed out, there will be an exempt report going to Cabinet on the 9th of March, which will go into more detail with regard to some of the more commercially sensitive elements of the land assembly. But if I can run through the main part of the report, that'd be helpful. In terms of what's been considered in the past, Cabinet in May 16 resolved to support the promotion of this site through the local plan, and in September 2017 Cabinet also allowed for the acquisition of land from Hallam Land Management, who were the promoter at the time of the site at the east of Lutterworth. Going over the page to paragraph 7, if we can just give you an update as to what the scheme is at the moment. You'll see that the site area extends to some 516 acres. In paragraph 8, 2,750 dwellings, of which we anticipate the greater part of those will be within this local plan period. 56 acres of development land, 2 schools, a local retail centre, as well as extensive open space. With regard to our land ownerships of those 516 acres, we currently have about 60% of that land, just over 300 acres. We have offers out to 25% more, which remains 5% still in detailed discussions. You'll see in paragraph 7 that we have been in discussion with Harborough District Council, asking them to use their compulsory purchase powers if required, and they have agreed to do so. Paragraph 10 outlines the current timetable for the adoption of the local plan. You'll see on the first line there that Harborough District Council approval to submit March 18. Well, that decision was taken at Harborough on Monday evening, and therefore the plan is to be submitted to the Planning Inspectorate next week. The examination in public, if the timescales are adhered to by the Planning Inspectorate, is planned for end of May, beginning of June, with then the adoption of the local plan towards the end of this year. I will add on to that point, January 19 will be about the time that we will be submitting our own planning application in outline for the scheme that was mentioned in paragraph 8. With regard to the examination in public in June, there are 4 issues that are likely to be required to be resolved, with first point being control of the land. The Cabinet report on Friday will go into detail as to how we intend to obtain control of the land. As I say, we've got 60%, we've got terms out on 35%, and we've got 5% still being discussed. The other 3 points, with regard to viability, impacts, and timetable, you'll see in paragraph 13 that work is ongoing to address all of those various items. Paragraph 14 mentions Housing Growth Fund, and this is important in that part of the scheme involves a substantial amount of infrastructure, namely a bridge over the M1 and various other off-site highways improvements, but including a spine road which will run through the centre of the scheme that you'll see in the appendix. That spine road is there to, one, service the development, but will also have an added benefit in that it will somewhat mitigate the highways impacts that Lutterworth Town Centre currently has, which is leading to an air quality issue. Resource implications, you'll see that the net capital receipt is 33 million, and that this is going to be achieved over the next 3 to 12 years, which is effectively the housing sales trajectory over the local plan period. Cost of preparing and submitting the planning application is estimated between £600,000 and £700,000, and I would add on to that another £170,000 of promoters' costs. When we took over the promotion of the site from Hallam Land last year, the promoters' costs to us would have been somewhere in the region of 4 to 5 million over the plan period, so we've made a substantial saving by bringing it in-house. Bit of a spin through, but that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Right, who'd like to ask some questions? Michael Charlesworth, got you first.
Yeah, just a quick one. I was going to ask you how much of the 516 we've got in possession, but you've already said 60%. The 35% that's out at the moment on offer or whatever, plus the 5% which has still not been detailed yet, is that a mixture of developer land and privately owned land? And noting that the inspector will be calling May, June, is it going to be feasible, if we have to go down the compulsory purchase route, of getting the rest of it in time to meet the local plan inspection?
Well, I can tell you, in answer to your first question, there is no developer land. We've removed the developer who had option land. These are 3 farming families. One has a stake of approximately 30% of the site, and so the other 10% are 5%. With regard to the examination in public and the amount of confidence that we'll be able to give to the inspector, we're confident that we will have enough, even if it's just a signed option agreement, by that point to give the inspector confidence. The fact that the District Council has already passed, in principle, the compulsory purchase order authority means that, again, if we fail to make an agreement with the 3 landowners, then that's a fallback position which will be sufficient. In other strategic development areas, in other local plans, for one promoter to have control of the entirety of a site of 516 acres is, it is something of an achievement, and I'm sure the inspector will be more than happy to see that 60% is certain and 40% is work in progress.
No, not really. Just a comment, if I may, and that is just on paragraph 8. I'm very supportive. I think the Appendix A, it is, well, shame it isn't in colour, but it lays out quite a good development. But just two small questions, but not a real moan. On paragraph 8, we are talking about the construction of a spine road. As you well know, the spine road started off to be a promise of a dual carriageway, and this spine road is integral to the delivery of this development, because without that it would be very difficult to have this development. But since then, it has been featured in the growth plan as an integral part of Lutterworth becoming a key centre. And I find that somewhat disturbing, because this is not a major infrastructure provision to relieve the air quality of Lutterworth, or to feature future development, to future employment side. This is actually a spine road that needs to serve the construction traffic and the possible, delivery of this development. So that's just a small rant, but nothing major. And number 14, you are talking about the expression of interest to the LEP and Homes England for a grant. Could you just elaborate that a little bit and, give me a little bit more information on that? And could you also tell me why the possibility of trying to raise funds through promoting this as a garden village hasn't been considered? So, and with that, good luck.
Okay, if I can go back to the Spine Road point first. I think there may have been some misunderstanding in the early part of the scheme with regard to the purpose of the Spine Road, and I think the labels that were attached to it, I think, ended up being somewhat unhelpful when it was called a relief road and then a bypass road before we settled on the word Spine Road. And because this road was never forming part of the strategic road network as a bypass to Lutterworth, its purpose was always to enable the development to proceed. And if we had a dual carriageway 60-mile-an-hour bypass, then the amount of junctions that would be required of it to feed 2,750 homes would have rendered it unviable. So, although the nomenclature at the time was unhelpful, it has always been drawn as a single carriageway.
May I come back on that, please? But therefore, I've recognised it, but it needs to be recognised in a strategic context as well, because if this road is featured as a major bit of infrastructure in relation to the growth plan and to promote Lutterworth at the key centre, well, that is, highly wrong, because if you are looking at further expansion of your site or even of Lutterworth, then a strategic road network infrastructure is required, and exactly that explanation you have just given has got to be conveyed to the other parts. So in order not to neglect Lutterworth and that development in future from any future infrastructure improvement, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I do see what you mean. I mean, the road has been designed to take into account the full 2,750 homes and the industrial space and the commercial space. So unless in the next plan period of 2030 to, say, 2050, there's an expansion to this development, then additional highways infrastructure will be required, and whether at that point a wider at which point may it be called a relief road, may be required. But at the moment, for everything that's in Appendix A as drawn, the highways infrastructure is sufficient. I mean, we can go on to the point about with Junction 20A coming forward, which again may provide future relief to Lutterworth Town Centre. The road as drawn gives incidental relief to Lutterworth Town Centre, and it is understood that we're not going to, unless there's additional traffic regulation or was put into place with regard to Lutterworth High Street and HGVs using that hill and standing traffic in the centre of Lutterworth. The air quality assessment for the planning application will just take into account the road as it's drawn. With regard to the Housing Growth Fund, sorry, could you just remind me what your question was with regard to that? Okay, with regard to the Housing Growth Fund, both the Housing Infrastructure Fund and other HCA or Homes England funding streams, we're through the first hurdles of those. What we did was put this site, Junction 20, and the possible scheme at Stony Stanton, which would be the first link of the A46 Expressway, Foss Way, into one overall bid as a South West Leicestershire Growth Fund, which approximated, I believe, about 45 million in total. With regard to this site, the fund has been asked for 18 million, of which 14 is for the bridge, and other elements will be spent on improvements to Frank Whittle roundabout, some widening to the approaches to the M1 bridge at Junction 19 and Junction 20, sorry, and also an element of the spine road. With regard to your point,
hang on.
Oh.
So coming back on that, great news to hear that it's gone through the first element. So it looks very positive to receive this. And then will that affect the profit score? Because we're talking about realising about 33 million. Would that still be the same, or would that up it before you go on to the Garden Village?
Okay, with regard to yes, we're through the first hurdle. We're anticipating hearing that we're through the second hurdle later this month, in which case we will then be required to submit our full business case. We're currently in the high-level expressions of interest. We expect to hear in October this year whether we've been successful. With regard to will it increase the capital receipt to the council and to the fund in particular, the money will be used to accelerate the delivery of the houses by bringing the bridge development into an early phase of the scheme. Means that rather than it being in year 8, it will be year 2 or 3. So the overall number of houses will be exactly the same that will be provided. But what it does do, it compresses the development timetable. So our receipts will be broadly similar, but we will receive them earlier. With regard to the Garden Village, I will have to profess that I do not know the answer to that. I can certainly try and find out, but that is...
No, that's okay, because I was just wondering, because government gave many financial incentives for the delivery of major garden villages, and I was just wondering why that wasn't explored, but we are late at the date now, and this sounds very positive. Thank you.
David Bill.
I'm going to comment on Chairman, is the issue of the ambition for a dual carriageway up there. I can see that if you had a dual carriageway, you'd have less junctions, and it would be more difficult to develop because we have to accept the principle that you can't, with new development, you can't tackle existing problems. You can only tackle the problem that you're trying to face in the first place.
If I may come back, point of information, I didn't say that. I said that it is featured in the growth plan as a benefit, and it is for this development, not for the general use of traffic going down the A426 to Lutterworth or to Magna Park or to other to Rugby to relieve the congestions. So that is what I've tried to say.
Lee Brecken.
Thank you. It was just a couple of points. On page 57, you've got the A426 down as the 462 on your map, so just for information on that one. I think garden village schemes have to be really ready to go. I think land ownership has to be clarified and clear, and I think because of the issues that you're currently working through, that's probably why that's not a favoured scheme. And I think Junction 20A would relieve Lutterworth. If you come in from the north down, you probably would come off at Junction 28 to come through, but whether sort of Lutterworth then up through Dunton Bassett 228's dual carriageway, that would speed things along, but obviously then you'd slow down when you go north through to Blaby and Whetstone, and when you come south through down to Lutterworth. So it may add value, but it's whether that's part of the scheme that's given and funded. So
okay, I'll take that as a comment. Terry.
Thank you, Chair. If the HIFBIN funding doesn't come through, will the scheme still go ahead?
Yes, it will.
Anyone else? Okay. Can I just ask you about, if it all goes ahead, how it will be? One of the things we hear about Lubbersthorpe is that the family who owns a lot of that, so rather than just sold it off in plots to the house builders, they've retained a lot of control. So through the being ownership of the land, I'm told that they're able to have a lot more.
SEN, which is funded by the dedicated grant, the overspend there has increased slightly by £500,000 to £1.4 million. We still expect to be able to contain that within the SEN reserve rather than impacting the wider council budget. The cost reductions are continuing to progress and progressing well, which is a good contrast to last year. The factors causing the overspend are more factors outside of our control, things like mediations where there's been a disagreement between ourselves and the parents about the suitability of places, or complex cases arising, people moving into the county. So it is more positive than last year, but it is still an area we need to be very mindful of. Moving to the main CFS department, Children's and Family Services Department, again is slightly worse position, £500,000 worse, moving to £4.4 million overspend. The main item in there is obviously the placements we've talked about before, but that has been stable over the last few months, although it is still a significant item to keep an eye on. The main cause of the increase in expenditure is agency staff being used. There's been recruitment difficulties in the department on the social work side, so that is driving additional costs for the department, and that's one that we need to keep an eye on moving into next year. That doesn't impact the position there as well. Adults being the main department there. They're showing an improvement, £500,000 to a £4.4 million underspend. There's been a very significant increase in residential and nursing care expenditure. There's been an additional underspend of £2.8 million there, so it's a very big movement. And there's a combination of factors. £1.8 million is, we call it additional income from health, but what it really is just a mix of needs. As people get assessed, is it a health need or is it a social care need? And that mix has tipped towards health. Sometimes it goes the other way, sometimes it comes back, but that's what's one of the main causes there. The other £1 million is just less service users, and the ones that have come through tend to be at the lower end of the needs spectrum than we were initially expecting a year ago. So that's the main reason for the cost coming lower. That's been offset by a handful of items. Community care services spending about an extra £500,000, which is relatively small in the scheme of the budgets. Again, it's one of those that you'll see move up and down, but it's not out of expected parameters. A concern area similar to CFS is agency costs. We've got another £800,000 in the department, and again, just need to make sure that kind of it relates to recruitment difficulties, so the department can actually get the sort of the permanent staff in, which sort of that are much more preferable to sort of the agency staff on a long-term basis. We've also, which is a bit of a sort of a accounting tweak, as it were, sort of reduced reserve contributions by 800,000. Partly this is to allow projects that are identified for next year to be funded, but also what we don't want to do is understate the adult social care position with all the sort of the focus on what we're spending with all the sort of the extra government funding and things like that. So we don't really want to sort of create an own goal by sort of understating the spend with the use of income from reserves if we can manage it within that overall kind of county council budget or even departmental budget. But overall, adults is similar to what was reported previously, apart from the agency spend. In terms of public health, there's quite a big movement on this. The underspend's increased. It was tiny before 100,000 by £1 million to 1.1. Half of this is a bit of a technical adjustment. What we've done is previously the department were going to fund, and there still are, a refurbishment of a sexual health service accommodation. But because we've included that in the 18-19 MTFS to make that sort of planning process clearer, we don't need to sort of include it here. The rest of the reasons for that increase in underspend is just lots of bits and pieces, sort of a range of contracts and services underspending. So the main driver of the public health underspend is still the change in the approach to rolling out the local area coordinators, as opposed to sort of anything sort of significantly different. Moving into environment and transport, the underspend's dropped slightly by 300,000 to £0.9 million. The key areas of extra spend, which you kind of may expect, just sort of with the weather outside, is extra demand on winter and reactive maintenance, which has driven about £600,000 extra. There's also been a bit of extra spend on the road safety partnership or road safety area, £300,000. Originally they were going to fund it from a reserve, but because they can afford the additional spend, they're just going to manage it through the departmental budget. These extra spend items obviously don't add up to the overall E&T sort of dropping underspend. It's because the waste tonnages have continued to drop from the original budget, and that's meant another £500,000 can be released compared to where we are in period 6. Corporate Resources Chief Executive I wasn't going to touch on. There's been minimal change in there, to be honest. There's nothing of great excitement in there. The next big mover is the inflation contingency that we hold. We've released another £300,000 that wasn't required. Compared to the start of the year, we had a sort of a £13 million budget. We've released slightly over £3 million. Costs just haven't been or cost in contracts haven't been feeding through, despite the sort of level of general inflation being high. So we continue to monitor it, and we continue to release it back in to offset future savings every time we do an MTFS. That gives us a departmental position of £6.4 million, which is £1 million better than period 6. We've also got some central item adjustments which add a bit to that underspend. The biggest one is we call it prior year adjustments, and it's basically where people make a reserve or a commitment for expenditure they think is going to get invoiced. And we tend to do a sort of an annual mop-up of this, and we've got about £500,000 is coming through there. So overall, we've got an improvement since period 10. We've now got an underspend of £7.4 million, which is a couple of £1 million better. So I'll pause there. Happy to take questions.
Yep. Just on paragraph 28, then, you're predicting overspend on winter maintenance of 0.4 million. Does that take into account the sort of awful situation last week? Unfortunately, when I live on a gritting route, and I know when the gritter goes by at night, so I know exactly how many times, and it's been going out a lot, and sometimes more than once a night. I mean, sometimes they've gone out in the afternoon and then gone out again overnight. So, I mean, it's got to be done, and it's great that they are keeping up, but that won't, we must be using more grit, more salt, and more driver hours. So it's going to have an impact given that weather, isn't it?
I think you're right. I think the cold spell sort of lasted than people predicted, because they do obviously look sort of forward in terms of the weather forecast to try and judge different things, but it probably has persevered longer. It's sometimes the effect can be quite delayed, because although they're sort of going out on the roads, it means they can't do other maintenance jobs. So the effect of the winter, some of it might be a little bit more sort of spending this year, but it also impacts next year as well.
Just to add to that, Chairman, given our overall financial control and our favourable position, I think decisions around gritting that will be driven by safety, not by finances, and we're in a strong position to do that.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that may eat into the what is a positive situation, it may mean that we just, because I think we used to have a reserve for winter maintenance.
Yeah, we used to.
Do we still?
Probably gone now.
We just fund it.
I think we can absorb it overall.
We just absorb it.
Our finances.
Yep. Okay. Alan? Have I got double glazing? Yeah, I've got double glazing. I still hear the gritter go by. Yeah, and the flashing light reflects on top as well. No, I feel reassured when I hear it go by. All is well. That was it. You hadn't got It's not a question about the budget. It was just whether I'd got double glazing. Okay. Any other points this far? Okay. Sorry, Terry.
Yes, I was just thinking, while we're thinking of things, forces beyond our control, the other one seems to be agencies. Is this going to be a continuing force beyond our control, or is there some way we can sort this out? Agency staff, that is.
For both adults and children, the intention isn't that it's an ongoing problem, but it is something that all local authorities, or not all local authorities, a lot of local authorities seem to be facing at the moment. So it is a little bit of a case if you go out with your recruitment sort of program, you gain as many people as you can. If you don't get them, it's a case of going back and replanning, and that's kind of the cycle they're in at the moment. But the intention is that agency is always going to be a feature of what we do, just to kind of make sure we've got a full complement of workforce, but it's to keep it at a much lower level than it is at the moment.
Okay. It is topical in the press today, and an opportunity for you to just explain why we do it. This issue of the £5 million loan to Northamptonshire, leaving aside Northamptonshire's problems. Can you just set out why, why do we do that sort of short term? What are the benefits from us doing that in terms of the way we manage our budget?
Our treasury management policies are approved by members, both cabinet and through to full council, and we comply with that. And corporate governance do monitor our activities in that area. Obviously, we're quite limited in terms of where we can lend money now into the banking sector, and that there are not many banks that we will do business with. But our treasury management approvals, as agreed by members, do allow us to lend to other local authorities. They are effectively part of the government, and in many ways are therefore backed by the value of the UK government in that sense. And that's why we're making the comments that it is highly unlikely that a local authority would renege on a loan because of the overall implications for the public sector in terms of that. So it's within the guidelines and the parameters set by the elected members in terms of where we can lend money to.
Thank you, Brian. That's very helpful. Any other questions on the budget on this period? Did you want to say anything about capital, or have you done? Only if you've got anything significant to report. There's no worrying trends there. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Can I just point out that it is in fact Brian's last meeting, or last to this commission. He retires as Director of Corporate Resources at the end of March, and I'd personally like to take this opportunity to place on record my thanks, and I'm sure that of the Commission and all members as well, to Brian for his contribution and support to the work of this committee and to the Council as a whole. And on behalf of the Commission, I'd like to wish you a very happy and long retirement. If you want to make a speech, now's your chance.
Thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate that. And hopefully I reflected earlier that I found the input from the Commission really valuable, both as a department, EMSS, I mentioned. The 5-member panel on commercialisation that was led by this Commission was really influential. And when you look at what we're doing on that front, M's been one of the fantastic achievements, really. That all came out of the work of this Commission, really. So we've had a good relationship, but you've challenged me appropriately over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And good luck.
Right, I'll declare the meeting closed and remind you that the next meeting is on the 6th of June.
Thank you. And if you get bored, Brian...